All right. This video is going to be about energy vampires, properly and etymologically known as parasites. Now, many years ago, probably about 12, 13 years ago, I would have many builds with people, the people I was mentoring, the people I was mentoring, etc., and I would talk about energy vampires. Now, over time, I learned that there's an actual word for the phrase energy vampires when it refers to humans, and it's called a parasite. So as I learned more about language, I learned that many times, or sometimes, we use the wrong definitions of words to explain things. Like, for example, we have doctors and scientists and stuff that will use the word parasite when referring to something that's draining the energy from the human body, like a worm or something like that, right? Bacteria, whatever. However, according to the etymological definition of the word parasite, it actually means a person that's draining the energy of another person or another source, etc., etc. So now, part of my build many years ago was I would tell people, sometimes people don't know that they're that they're energy vampires. They don't know that they're parasites. They don't know it, and they don't want to be that. Right? Other people are aware that they're being parasitic, basically draining others, and they don't necessarily know how to change or want to change. So many times when I would talk about this build or talk about this topic of being vampiristic or parasitic, some people would listen to it and understand how they were draining others of their energy, basically bringing other people down instead of lifting people up. Right? An energy vampire is a person who's consistently draining the energy of other people, of other places, of other things, and avoiding contributing to those things, especially in a balanced way. For example, an energy vampire is a person that, let's say, they may get $1,500 from a person, and they're supposed to pay the person back, but instead of giving them the full $1,500, they'll give them $1,000. Another situation happens, they give less. Either way, an energy vampire is not going to reciprocate energy equally. It's not going to happen. They're parasitic. They're parasites. So for the rest of the video, I want to use the word parasite instead of energy vampire, even though, they can be used interchangeably. All right, so a parasite is some of the characteristics of parasite. They make a lot of excuses, right, as to why they can't do this and why they can't do that. Anytime they're in a conflict with somebody else, the parasite is never at fault. It's never their fault, and they can't see why the other person is reacting or responding the way that they are, because parasites are typically subjective in their thinking. A parasite typically won't see that in their conflicts, in their numerous conflicts, the one common denominator is themselves. The parasite doesn't see that. They think that they're like this perfect being that never does anything wrong or never has to be accountable. Parasites are also unaccountable. They, in their mind, they think that when a situation happens, it's only the other person's fault. Like only, and they have nothing to do with it. They're just like this onlooker, this observer, but that's not the case, man. A parasite is very subjective, so they don't look at their own behavior and how they contribute, how their energies and efforts and words contribute to an environment. They're not going to look at that. They're just going to be consistently draining the energy of other things, right? A parasite will never be, or rarely be, independent. They're going to be dependent upon others. They're going to want other people to do their dirty work, so to speak. In life, you got your clean work and your dirty work. The parasite is going to do what it can to avoid the dirty work and try to get other people to do their dirty work all the time. That's what parasites do. That's draining. They're emotionally draining, psychologically draining, physically draining. And if a person gets around a parasite, they'll know, because their energy level will be lowered. They can tell by how their energy field is, how their quantum field is, so to speak, that their energy level is going to be lowered instead of lifted up, right? So if you're watching this and you're considering that you could be parasitic to the people around you or to your environment, then it would be best to put, how would I say, to put your best foot forward, to be as motivational and inspirational as you can be through your actions and not your words. You know, a parasite is like a person that'll sell dreams. You know, they'll say, oh, I'll do this, I'll do that, and I'll give you this, and I'll give you that. But then when you look at their actions are not the same as their words. You know, parasites don't think that actions speak louder than words. They don't think like that. You know, they think that their words are enough to convince somebody so that they can use the person for whatever reason they would need to use them for. You know, and people are parasitic. You know, some people are parasitic for different reasons. You know, there's different ways that they want to drain somebody. It might not always be financially. It could be emotionally. It could be physically. It could even be sexually. They're just trying to find a way to drain this other person, because a parasite, they lack a lot of things. You know, parasite lacks discipline. A parasite is not going to be a disciplined person, not at all. They lack discipline. So anytime they're trying to follow a routine or follow a schedule or follow rules, whatever, they're gonna try to find a way around it. You know, they're gonna consistently look for excuses and ways to why they can't follow directions or follow instructions. You know, that's a parasite, man. What else, man? There's a lot of stuff. The parasites suffer from entitlement. They think that the world owes them things, like the world owes them money or finance or praise or whatever, when they're barely putting forth effort. You know, a parasite will half-ass a job or half-ass a thing and expect to get the full benefits or rewards from doing their half-ass job. You know, like that's how parasites think. They're not thinking high quality. They're not thinking quality over quantity. They're thinking quantity over quality. So parasites just like taking energy, sucking in energy from whoever and whatever they can. They're just trying to take in energy all the time because they're not the supplier of the energy. You see, so for a person who's highly productive, their biggest threat is a person who's parasitic, because a highly productive person can easily attract a parasitic person, because the parasitic person is already opportunistic and looking for somebody to drain or something to drain. It's already looking for that. So if you're a person, let's say, if you're a person who's optimistic, it's going to be easy to attract pessimistic people, because you're the light and they're that shadow, and you're shining light. You know, you're the flame and they're the moth. So they're going to be trying to get some of that flame. You know, they're parasites. You know, they'll even take a parasite would even, let's say if you got a friend that's a parasite, they'll even try to take credit for something that you've told them. Let's say they're going to help a friend out with some advice or some wisdom. The parasite won't be like, well, I got this from such and such. They'll just say it, but they won't cite the source of where they got the information from, because they're parasites. They want to get their energy and their credit for themselves, even though it's really not their energy. You know, they're parasites. The parasites have a lot going on. Entitlement, lack of discipline. They gotta, how do I explain it, man? Parasites have to see how they are the problem. You know, many times, a person who's parasitic will be highly critical of everything outside of them, but lowly critical of themselves. They're hypocrites. You know, hypocritic people are parasitic because they're critiquing others and other things while ignoring the critique to themselves. They basically take a blind eye to themselves and their own behaviors and own habits. That's a parasite. Let me swap it to energy vampire. So when we look at it from energetic perspective, right? Because that's the word, that's the phrase that'll really catch attention. If you get around a person who's parasitic, you'll always notice, I said this before, you'll always notice that your energy level will be drained. It will not be uplifted. You will not feel fulfilled. You'll feel emptier because it's essentially like they took something from you. Just by them existing, just by them talking, just by them doing whatever they're doing, because their energy is a draining energy, whether it's emotionally, financially, spiritually, whatever, because their energy is a draining energy, you're going to feel less than when you interact with them. You see, I'm in nature right now. Nature isn't parasitic. There's parasitic properties about certain things of it, but nature is about balance. Having a balanced life and having reciprocating energy and making sure everything is balanced. A parasite isn't concerned with, an energy vampire isn't concerned with balance. They're just concerned with how can they get some energy, because they're not the producer of the energy, right? So let's say if you are an energy vampire, what you have to do is you have to go, how can I contribute more? How could I contribute more to my environment and my situation? What am I avoiding when it comes to my environment and my situation? If I'm being parasitic, what am I avoiding? What am I not doing? What am I doing? A parasite, an energy vampire, if you're that, you have to be aware of your behaviors, right? More than likely, you need to put forth more effort. If you're in a vampiristic state, a parasitic state as a human, you need to look at how you can do more. Because if you're parasitic, you've already told yourself you can't do much. You're lying to yourself and telling yourself you can't do much when you can. And you can do a lot more. You see? So as an energetic being, which is what we all are, energy, of course you got plenty of energy to do things. Of course. So if you're this vampiristic person, like I said, find ways to be more productive. Find ways to do more. And then reward yourself after you do more. Consistently. Keyword, consistently. See, some energy vampires will do just enough, right? If the reward is $1,000, they'll do just enough. And then go, I need my $1,000. Even if they only did about $500 worth of work or $500 quality, they're gonna try to do just enough. When really it would be better if they went above and beyond, because, right? It'd be better if you went above and beyond if you're an energy vampire, because that excess energy of your cup spilling over in energy will also come back to you. You see, what energy vampires don't understand is that if they're draining their environment, the environment will drain them. So that's the big thing that they miss. It's like, bro, if you going around creating these relationships with other humans, right? You're creating these relationships with other humans, and you're draining those humans of their energy. And when they're out of a relationship with you, they feel way better, right? They feel way better, and their life improves and all this other stuff. Then that means that you were the vampire. That means you were the person draining them of their energy if they better off without you. Clearly, right? So you have to see, all right, well, what could I have been doing, or what was I doing that was draining that person of their energy? Or what was I not doing that caused that person to be less evenly yoked with me, so to speak? Your relationship should be evenly yoked. Both of y'all are carrying the same amount of weight and lifting the same amount of weight. With an energy vampire, they're gonna want you to do most of the hard work and most of the dirty work while they do all the clean work. Because they're not thinking about reciprocating energy or being equal. I see you up there, iguana. I'm not standing under any trees, so I can't be pooped on by iguanas. But yeah, that's what an energy vampire is, man. Or a parasite, which is the best way to explain it, the proper way to say it. That's what a parasite is, man. Parasites don't look at themselves. They barely can see themselves. And even if they do see themselves, what they see is going to be so ugly in themselves that they're just going to turn a blind eye to it instead of cleaning themselves up, clean up their act, etc., etc. So yeah, is there anything else I left out? I left out. Let me see. I said entitlement. I said they're not producing their own energy, so they're dependent upon others for energy, whether it's money or security, security or safety or health, just anything. They're barely gonna put forth effort into any situation because they're vampiristic. They're vampires. So you got to be on the lookout. Well, you don't have to be on the lookout. You just have to be mindful that these things exist. And if you're a person who's more empathetic, then you have to be more mindful of your energy and who's draining it and who's giving to your energy. You have to be mindful of it. Otherwise, being an empath, you can just keep on doing what you're doing. Knowing that some people are going to give you energy and some people are going to try to take energy away from you. But however, the key thing to pay attention to is, are they reciprocating the energy? If you're giving 1,000, are they giving you 1,000 back? If you're giving 100, are they giving you 100 back? If you're giving 50, are they giving you 50 back? If you're giving 10, are they giving you 10 back? Your energy has to be reciprocated. And like I said, you can always know who you're around by how you feel when you're around these people. If you feel better when you're around certain people, then you know they're not vamping off. If you feel worse when you're around these people, then you know that they're vamping off of you. And sometimes, some people, since they're reciprocating it, you just feel like normal. It'll just feel like you're basically in a relationship with yourself. It's equivalent. One more, let me see. Let me refresh my memory on this. So, if you're giving to the world, whether it's your money or your time or your effort, if you're giving and giving and giving, you're going to get that in return. If you're taking from the world, whether it's money, finance, emotions, whatever, then the world takes from you. That's how reality works. Okay? So you got to make sure, if you fall under that category of being a parasite or vampiristic, you got to make sure that you're giving a little bit more than what you're taking. If what you're taking is more than what you're giving, you already know you're parasitic. There's something on the tip of my tongue that I also wanted to touch on. It's going to come to me. It's going to come to me. I said entitlement. Parasites feel entitled. They make a lot of excuses. They're not going to be accountable in the situation. So if you have conflict with them, it's always going to be your fault and not the parasite's fault. And the parasite didn't do anything, etc., etc. So, yeah.